So I'm just going to give some brief impromptu thoughts on this latest bit of online drama which seems to have transcended into the real world at Vidcon. For those of you that don't know about Garbagegate and the Vidcon incident, you probably won't be interested in this video, but I'm just going to give a few thoughts on it. I would say this, I don't believe Sargon of Akkad's videos would constitute harassment in any way. They're relatively informative, and yes, they're highly critical of individuals, but the criticism is, I mean, if you're a public figure, you should expect criticism. There's nothing wrong with being strongly critical of an ideological opponent. And I would say that Sargon's videos fall short of the benchmark that would constitute abuse or harassment. So I don't think the allegations of harassment against Sargon are valid to start off with. That being said, I do think Sargon does sometimes behave a little bit like a troll in the sense that he wants to provoke a reaction. He's provocative, and again, that's not necessarily a problem, especially if you're a comedian. I mean, comedians, for example, are very provocative, and a lot of Sargon's videos do have a comedic appeal. But I don't think we should deny that Sargon was being provocative there. He desired a reaction. He wasn't really the victim of the interaction that occurred, because he benefited from that interaction. I mean, he could capitalize on it in terms of garnering the attention that someone who never responds to critics has finally broken and responded to a critic in a way that a lot of people would consider to be fairly amusing. So again, I think any insinuation that Sargon was the victim in this interaction is quite ridiculous. Clearly he isn't. He wanted to provoke that reaction. As for Anita, well, I mean, I think the problem there is if you're constantly offended by everything, then maybe sort of general criticism will seem intimidating. I mean, I think it's not a very good way to live your life to be constantly offended by relatively benign interactions. But on the other hand, I do understand that if you're a public figure, you are also going to receive a lot of real, genuine abuse. But again, that's not something that complaining bitterly about is necessarily going to help. That's more of an emergent property of being a celebrity. I mean, all celebrities receive a lot of mean comments, especially online. I think being a public figure, one has to accept that you are going to receive these sorts of negative, extreme negative reactions from people. And I mean, even I've received what might constitute hate comments, and I really am not much in the way of a public figure in terms of the amount of subscribers or whatever. So again, I think people have blown this whole thing out of proportion in a way, and I do think that the reaction from Vidcon was a bit hypocritical. Obviously, if the situation was reversed, I would have imagined they would have condemned the insult, not that anyone was really harmed by that insult, more unambiguously. So I think Sargon of Akkad got the reaction he wanted, and I think he benefited from that. Whereas I mean, perhaps Anita genuinely does believe that his actions sitting at the front were intimidating. I can believe that it was genuinely intimidating, coming from a mindset where you're so sensitive to criticism. And what I would point out is that if you don't interact with critics, you might have this attitude where you consider all criticism, all detraction from your point, to be abuse or harassment, and this kind of forms this maybe unhealthy symbiotic relationship between trolls and content creators, where the trolls provoke a reaction and they get capital in the form of attention from that interaction, and the recipients of that trolling also receive capital in terms of the media publicity that they can capitalize on from that interaction. We see this again and again. So I mean, when this interaction happened, there was a big media uproar and a big post about it, and everyone's getting a lot more attention for this. So we have this kind of unhealthy symbiosis between provocateurs and recipients of that provocation, which harms genuine critics in a sense, because genuine critics are then always assumed to be provocateurs, and because the capital that you get from engaging genuine criticism is often not as instantaneous and as rewarding as the capital you get from engaging provocateurs, because you can get instant publicity by portraying yourself as a victim. The sort of victimhood culture in a way makes it very easy to garner sympathy, to elicit a strong public response to the interaction. But whereas engaging genuine criticism can force you to come against beliefs that you hold very strongly yourself, and there's a potential to lose in terms of to be embarrassed that your position might not be as watertight as you thought it was. Whereas when you engage provocateurs, there's no real risk of the response being anything other than positive from your perspective. So, well, this is what I would call a symbiosis between trolls and content creators, and it harms, in a sense, it harms genuine discussions between ideological opponents, because there's less of a reaction to be gained from that, and then therefore less media capital to be made of it. Now, that's not to say that there's not a place for being provocative. Again, I think Sargon has a certain amount of comedic appeal, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I think it should also be acknowledged that he is trying to provoke a reaction. So I think it should be said for what it is. And I think in many cases, if you want to do that, then that's fine. But it may be detrimental to having a sensible conversation between ideological opponents if that's what you're trying to strive for. Now, there's definitely a place for this kind of satire and meme culture and the sort of comedy response, but I'm not sure if your ultimate aim is to facilitate conversations. I'm not necessarily sure this is the best way of going about it.